with his presentation titled How to Make Natural Wine at Home. Hello.
Hi. So, hello, I'm Haruki, and
So just make sure that the
Okay.
audio is recording. Okay, good.
is it working?
Yep.
Cool. So I have been making natural wines at Shindo Wines from 2021. So this year was my fourth season. I've done we finished vintage 2 weeks ago. Roughly a month ago, I broke my foot, so I couldn't work in the winery anymore. But the younger guys, they worked for me in the winery, so I didn't do much work. I just sitting on the computer and prepare this presentation. So. Anyway, so that's our winery. It's pretty tiny and clean. You don't need those instruments at home. Only thing you need is the grape, your hands, feet, and a jar or jug. Anyway, today I want to cover what is fermentation, what's natural wine, because there are just so many definitions of natural wine. You can call anything natural wine these days, and how to make natural wine at home. Please remember that you cannot do any alcoholic fermentation in Japan. It's actually forbidden by law. So if you're back in, I don't know, I think in the US you can brew at home, but in Japan it's not allowed. So please don't do it, but be careful. And also challenges of making natural wine in Kyushu. Anyway, just simply, what is alcoholic fermentation? It's just a microbial biological process of converting simple sugars. For the wine, it's glucose and fructose, and converting that into energy and CO2, and also the alcohol you are hopefully drinking right now. So they ferment not for humans, not for ourselves, but for themselves. So they take energy from fermentation. They can also breathe and take energy from breathing, but in the absence of air and anaerobic conditions, they ferment. So bacteria responsible for this process. Alcohol fermentation is yeast, and for wine making, I think beer making or sake making, we use Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And when winemakers talk about they use yeast that are living on the grape skins, so it's only 5% of these yeasts actually are usable for the wine fermentation, wine making itself. So we need to increase that proportion of 5% to roughly more than 95% before actually using it for wine fermentation. So how do we do that? We cover that today. So lots of people say the monkey used to make natural wines. That's how the natural wine scene came about. But I believe it's not really possible to make good wine naturally. So if the grapes falls off the trees and just crushed and there's a juice, of course it ferments, but then it turns into vinegar quite quickly, so it's not possible to make. So you've never seen just natural wine just somewhere in the forest, in the vineyard, right? Because it's not, I would say it's not possible. So there's nothing very natural in natural wine. It just means there's not much addition or subtraction. So that's in a natural state. So no agreed upon requirements for the natural wine, but what we normally do is we don't add anything to master ferment, or no subtraction. We don't take out anything from the ferment or wine. And we use a tiny bit of sulfur antioxidants up to 30 ppm, so it's really nothing much. In normal conventional winemaking, they use more than 100 ppm even before starting the fermentation to kill off all the bacteria and yeast. So we don't do any of that. We just only put 30 ppm before bottling, up to 30 ppm. You don't. And the wine I brought today, I didn't use any sulfur, so 0 ppm. So in order to make wine, you need grapes first. You can grow grapes like we do at Shindo Wines. We've started growing grapes 3 years ago, and so this year was the first harvest. And on the left-hand side, I have peony in my hand. This giant. This peony is the grape you can find in normal supermarket, like a kyoho. It's edible grape, table grape. And that is Campbell Early. It comes from the USA. It's also edible grapes that you buy in the supermarket sometimes. And this one is called Kai Noir. So that's a Japanese hybrid between British vinifera, so winemaking grape, and also edible grape in Japan. And we grow peony and Kai Noir. So if you want to make wine at home, you can grow them, but it takes at least 3-4 years until you do the first harvest. And so the easy thing you can do is to buy them from the supermarket. We buy 75% of our grapes not from supermarkets, but from the local producers in Ukiha City and Asakura City, and 25% we grow them organically by ourselves. For the wine to be natural in the international context, we have to use organic grapes. But in Japan, people really don't care too much about how the grapes are actually cultivated and made. It can be organic, it doesn't have to be organic. And it's really difficult to get organic certified grapes in Japan because there are just so many farmers around who don't really believe in organic or biological process. So organic farming or biologic farming. So it's very difficult to get certification in Japan. So briefly, I mentioned about 5% of yeast which are living on the grape skins are usable for the wine fermentation. So how to increase that proportion? This is how we do it. So I made a video in the winery. The video is in Japanese, but there's no speaker, so I will translate it. So this is what I'm doing here. I have Canberra early. I just harvested on that day, and I'm stemming berries. I'm taking the berries from the stems. So we can use the stem as well, but stems gives you this sort of herby, fresh, greeny, earthy flavor, which I don't really want to use in our wine. So I'm destemming. At the same time, I'm inspecting if there's a mold or insect or the sour bit that you don't want to, use for the wine. So I'm inspecting that at the same time. Also smelling to make sure it's not sour, because it's sour, most likely it is acetic acid bacteria inside, and I don't want to introduce that into this starter which we use for the full-scale winemaking. But this is the way you make red wine actually. So you put stem or berries with the stems, without the stems, in the tank like this on a jug, and you press it. So I did it with my hand, but you can also do this if the tank is big enough. You can use the feet and you can stomp on them. That's what we do normally at the winery. And if we're preparing like 50 kilo starter, then doing everything by hand just takes so much time, so we are stomping all the time. And this is how it looks like after stomping or after pressing. And you have to make sure the juice is covering the skins of the grapes. And this is roughly 60% of the tank volume. And you can seal it here and then wait for 3-4 days until the fermentation to start. But the most important thing here is to introduce or add CO2 into the tank. This is maybe a little bit tricky at home. So if you put CO2 into the tank, you can make the environment inside the tank anaerobic, so there's no oxygen inside, so that the yeast can actually not breathe but ferment and start producing alcohol, which kills off all the bacteria we don't want to use for the wine fermentation later on. So this is only 6 liter. When we ferment wine in Shindo Wines, we use, for the one ferment, we use roughly 1,000 kilogram or more. That equates to roughly 700 liters of wine. And in order to start full-scale fermentation, we want to add at least 1% of the juice as a starter. So if you have 700 liters of the juice, we need at least 7 liters or preferably 2%, so 14 liters. What we do is we scale the quantity up, and this is how we do it. For the conventional winemaking, you use cultured yeast, but what we do is we are actually growing the population by making red wine. So you see in the jar, in the tank, that's how we do. That's how you make red wine at home, pretty much. Only thing you need to do is take off the skins, and there you can have the red wine. But here, so this is for fermenting 200 liters of the wine, but what we do is 1,000 liters. So we use roughly 10 liters at the start, like we did in video, and then we will get that up to 30 liters, 20 liters and 30 liters, and then we use 15 liters of the 30 liter wine to start fermentation. And if you do this by the end of third tank, you will have population, so yeast population like 98%. In number, it's roughly, so we measured roughly before times to 10 to the power of 7 or something like that. At the beginning, it's like 1 times to 10 to the power of 4. So that's huge percentage more. And you need that much population to start fermentation, the clean fermentation. And so that's how pretty much you make red wine. And you want to use the press if you want to make white wine. So white wine, you take only the juice and you ferment only the juice. So what we do here, this is a basket press, with traditional basket press. And what we do is we put all the grapes, whole bunch, with destemmed or only the berries into the basket, and you lower the weight and press the juice out of it. And the skins and seeds and stem, they work like a filter. So when the juice comes out from these small openings and holes, it's a bit difficult to see. The juice is very clean and filters, which is really great for a clean fermentation. If you have tried natural wine before, sometimes you get like really funky, really funny aroma, and we call it off flavor. Off flavor can develop if this juice is not clean or fermentation doesn't start within 24 hours or something. So if you wait for, normally, so if I go here, this is the beginning of the fermentation. So this is how you make red wine, but you can also think this is a white wine without any berries inside. If you don't add any starter or nothing, if you are just using this only 5% of the yeast, it takes 3 to 5 days until fermentation to start. Until you see the first signs of bubbles. By then, you will have developed off flavors in your wine, which is really like a vinegar aroma, or also can be like a how do you call it, nail polisher. It's not nail polish, is it? That's right. You get this kind of aroma in your wine, which is people consider to be a sign of natural wine, but it's just off flavor in the it's a normal winemaking scene. So I don't want to have any of that. So it's very important to have a clean, starter.
Why does not that happen for the starter?
It happens, but then when you scale up 2-3 times, the population of these off-flavor producing bacteria goes down, and they are killed off by not having enough oxygen or having alcohol in the thing. So it happens, but that's why you have to do it 2-3 times until you get a really clean population. And I've took this photo after 7 days of fermentation, so it's very clean. Oh, sorry. This is ferment. So once the fermentation finishes, normally fermentation takes roughly 1 week or 2 weeks, depending on how hot your wine is. We try to keep the fermentation quite long, like 3-4 weeks, which is quite long for winemaking, especially for natural wine. When it's really quick, it can be done within 3-4 days. So I want to keep the fermentation quite long, because in the fermentation period you can create aroma coming also from the grape, but also from the yeast when they are fermenting. So I want to have as much this really nice complex aroma as possible from the fermentation. So I want to keep it long. Only thing you can do once the fermentation starts is control the temperature in natural winemaking. So normally for white wine, you want to ferment in the range between 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, and for the red wine, 25 to 30 degrees. If it becomes more than 35 degrees, you might have stuck fermentation, or you have more risk of microbiological spoilage. So, but here at the Shindo Wines, I try to ferment at 10 to 12 degrees to make it really cold, like where you make sake, ginjo sake. You try to ferment quite low and longer period. That's why I try to imitate at the Shindo Wines. Once the fermentation finishes, after we leave it settle for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and if there's no more bubbles, you will find leaves on the bottom of the tank. And you can mix leaves in your wine and bottle it, but the leaves has a really distinct flavor of really dead yeast. It's really difficult to describe how that smells, but it's a bit powdery and It's okay to have a little bit lees in your bottle, but preferably it's better not to have too much. So what we do here, you can call this subtraction. I try to call it separation because we are natural. So what I'm doing here is taking the clean wine into a different tank or jug. That's pretty much it, and leaving the lees behind. And for these lees in Japan, we need to keep them because they're really strict. Tax bureau in Japan is very strict, so we have to keep the lease, and then when they come to inspect our lease, we have to show them how much we have, then we can throw it away. In New Zealand, you can just, so I studied in New Zealand, so we can flush the leaves at the toilet or anywhere. Or in Spain, also I also made wine in Spain, you can just, ditch them. And you can just put it anywhere you want. But in Japan, they are very strict. And we have to measure how much leaves there are in liters, and also have to see how much alcohol it has. So once it's racked into a different tank, it's very important to keep the tank full. So this is only 1 centimeter here. And you need to keep the wine away from the oxygen. Oxygen is really bad for the wine. Once the wine is oxidized, it has this oxidized aroma, which is really a flavor I don't really like and no one really likes. And also with oxygen here, you will have, again, acetic acid bacteria living on the oxygen and on the surface of the wine, and they turn alcohol into vinegar, so it's which you don't really want to have in your wine. You find lots of vinegar natural wine in Japan, also elsewhere in the world, and which I think if you really, if you try to manage your wine really nicely and cleanly, you can do so. But sometimes winemaker, especially natural winemakers, we just tend to be lazy and just forget to add CO2 or argon gas, or because it's natural, we can leave the tank half full and have a lots of oxygen, and that makes vinegarish wine. So once it's finished, we can mature for as long as we want, because we make wine every single year. We try to mature at maximum 8 to 10 months because we need the tanks again. So we mature 8 months or 10 months, and then we bottle them, and we let them mature inside the bottles as long as we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It doesn't really matter. So this is how we bottle. We do everything by hand. We have a bottling machine which does 800 bottles per hour, but in this way we can do 500 bottles per hour, and we don't need any expensive machinery. It's very easy to clean because we cannot add any chemicals in our wine or using a winery. We try to make it really clean, and we use the instrument that we can really clean, we can separate hundreds of parts and stuff like that. So bottling machine is really giant, it's really difficult to clean and wash. And also bottling machine came from Italy, and it's very difficult to use. And so lastly, I want to talk about the challenges of making wine in Kyushu. You've seen, so most likely in Japan, if you find new winery, they are based in Hokkaido, Yamagata, and Yamanashi area when it's too cold, because there's a reason why they make good wine in the colder regions, because the grapes has enough time to develop and store sugar in their berries, and also the pH acidity of the grapes, they don't go down. So in Kyushu, where it's too hot and rain so much, percentage of sugar inside the berry they don't really go up so much, because then we have roughly 20% bricks, 18% bricks, so that's a measurement of the sugar. When you see in the supermarket 14% or 15%, 60%, it just means how much sugar is in the fruit. So bricks is one measurement of that. You want to have at least 18% bricks. That gives you roughly 10% alcohol. You won't have 10% alcohol in your wine, otherwise you might see a spoilage in your wine, because bacteria, we can suppress the activity of bacteria with alcohol. You won't have 10%. 9.5% is also okay, but 10% is one aim. When it rains too much, the bricks doesn't go so high up, like 18%, so say 16%, 17%, and you get like 8% alcohol attend, so we can only make pet nuts. So this is a pet nut sparkling wine because we didn't have much sugar in the berries. I made a pet nut. With the pet nuts, we can suppress the activity of the spore and bacteria by having a CO2 inside the bottle. And the pH is very important. pH also, if you have a high pH, that means low acidity. Again, it's very difficult to control the spoilage of the bacteria inside the bottle. So you want to have high acidity, so meaning low pH. In Kyushu, because it's too hot, grapes lose acidity quite quickly. In the colder climate, grapes don't lose so much acidity because its temperature is cold. So two challenges in Kyushu: not having enough bricks or high bricks, or high pH, low acidity. That makes making wine in Kyushu very difficult, challenging. There's one way, naturally, how we can sort of introduce acidity. So for the bricks, we can wait long time for the grapes to mature. Then you get enough bricks, but no acidity. So you want to add verjuice. Verjuice is juice with high acidity. We can make verjuice when we harvest unripe grapes in July, June. It's really sour, high acidity, low pH, and then we make a juice out of it and we freeze it and we use it 2 months later when we ferment wines. Yeah, so that's 20 minutes, and thank you for hearing the presentation. So I think it's now time for the questions if you have any.
Time for questions. All right, yeah, floor is open for questions. We got a good amount of time, about 10 minutes. Yeah, go ahead, okay.
Anything,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
So you were saying that wine really doesn't occur naturally because you need to have the addition of yeast. But
Yeah.
before, I mean, I guess that was a simple way of putting it, but in the past, when
Yeah.
you didn't really have a way of extracting yeast in a scientific way,
Mhm.
in ancient Roman Greece, there were tons of wine.
Yeah,
Do you know, how did they get the yeast?
just like I did in the video.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because there's a 5% of population are actually the yeast usable for the fermentation. So we use that to ferment. Yeah.
So back in those days, just in those days, you didn't have as much yeast you could add directly to the wine. Did that influence the kinds of wine you could make in those days?
Oh, you mean introducing yeast?
Yeah, like they used basically the yeast that was in the grape must already.
Yeah, yeah.
So because now we can add yeast to speed up the process, did that make wine in the old, like ancient world different than wine that we could expect today?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, introducing different kinds of yeast, they produce different kinds of aromas and different profile of aromas. That's why I don't use cultivated yeast, because when you add cultivated yeast, it kind of gives a different, it gives the wine different profile, aroma profile, which you normally cannot get for me, Ukiha and Asakura City. Yeah, so what I want to do is to express our terroir, our region. So in order to do so, I try to use the varieties that are living in that area. Of course, I can make wine with the champagne yeast or any other as a Bordeaux yeast, but that kind of gives it like a Bordeaux kind of flavor. I don't want to do that in Fukuoka. So I think in ancient times if they used the yeast we can use right now, then they will have a different profile. Yeah.
Did you have a question? Yeah.
Those.
Right. A very simple question. If you have a bunch of grapes, how much wine does that make?
So normally what we say is normally from 1 kilo of grape, you can get 1 bottle of wine.
Oh.
So 750 ml. In Fukuoka, the way I make wine, we get from 1 kilo of grapes, we make roughly 600 milliliter of wine. So it's not really full bottle, but if you do everything efficiently, you can get 1 bottle. Yeah, from 1 kilo. Yes.
I'm wondering, because we're in Kyushu, if there are any Yamabudo or
yes, there are Yamabudo really high in sugar content, also high in acidity. Yamabudo is natural native grape from Japan, so we can use them as well. What we do normally is we we make a new hybrid using Yamabudo. It's like Yamabudo with Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and we make some Yama Sauvignon, Yama Franc or something like that, which is really suitable for Kyushu in Japan region. That's what we normally do. So Kai Noir is a mix of, I think that was Cabernet Sauvignon and also something else, but I think that has some Yamabudo in it, I think, yeah. Because Yamabudo is really resistant against fungal disease, or they're really suited for the climates in Japan. Yeah, so we can use them. Yeah.
I really like your talk.
Thank
You
you.
said you crush your grapes by hand,
Yeah.
and others do it by foot.
Yeah.
What is the reason for using the body and not some sort of like mechanical device, or is that to add to the?
Yeah, so we can use the press. We can also use the press. The thing is, so that press was for 900 kilogram. So this press here, we can put 900 kilogram of grapes if they are crushed. So if you don't crush the grape, you can only put maybe 300 kilogram.
But I mean, like the method of crushing your grapes. Like, why would you use your feet? Like, why would you use the method
So
of crushing?
in natural way, so in natural winemaking scene, we say that you can sense how much percentage of grapes are kind of crushed under your feet, you know. So you can feel it. You can feel it when it's crushed or not crushed. And also, we try to say that you can crush it softly and nicely, but you can also use the normal machine for that. It's just cheaper. It's just so much cheaper if you are doing. But we don't stomp the grape like 1,000 kilogram grapes or anything like that. So we only do up to maybe 300 kilo, and it's too much after 300 kilo. So when we're pressing a 600 kilogram, then we might just do in here. We just throw everything in here and then let them press. Yeah. Did it answer your question?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
You said at the beginning that only 5% of the yeast on
Yeah.
the skin
Yeah.
can be used for making wine.
Yeah.
What about the rest of the 95% of the yeast? What can be?
So what we say normally is, I don't know what's, so 95%, I think you can also use for winemaking, but I don't think it does the alcoholic fermentation we want them to do. Meaning they will always produce some other byproducts which we don't see in our wine. So by research we know only 5% works in alcoholic fermentation, but they must be doing something else, which I don't really know.
I'm aware that some bread makers make bread with
Yes.
yeast from the skin,
Mhm.
actual yeast.
Yeah, so I
I'm
think
assuming it's the
it's the same.
95% is not those 5% that you use.
That's the same. This 5%. Where's this baker's yeast, right? So this Saccharomyces cerevisiae is also the baker's yeast. Yeah.
That's used for virtually all alcohol.
Yes.
in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in bread making, it's actually eating protein rather than sugars, right?
So for bread making, so this yeast produces alcohol in bread making as well. But so not much alcohol is left in the bread, but you can also find the alcohol in your bread.
The baking is
Yeah.
evaporating alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from your talk, it seemed that about red wine and white wine,
Mhm.
it's basically the process. that
It's same.
distinguishes
Yeah.
red from white.
Yeah. That's right.
So
So,
what makes the grape more suitable for red or white?
You can also make white wine from the red grapes. You can, because you're already taking the juice out of it. It's pretty much flavor. The way.
I just wonder, like, you have some wine regions that are famous for white wine,
Mhm.
not for red. So
Yeah.
why is this close?
So normally for the white wine making, they use white grapes and red grapes. And so for the red one, they use red grapes. But it's pretty much depends on what kind of wine the winemaker wants to make. We have pretty much only Kyoho and those edible grapes that are really red in skins. So we are limited with what we can make. So we try to make white wine from this red grape, and the wine becomes kind of like orangey in color. So it's not possible to get a nice champagne golden color. But we also grow white grapes, white wine grapes. And from that, I make white wine and orange wine. But yeah, I think it's just what gives the aroma to the wine is the skins or seeds or the yeast itself. So how the skin tastes is also very important when you decide what kind of direction you want to make, directional style wine you want to make. Yeah. So you need to eat them. You need to eat and decide. That's what I do. Normally I eat them.
All right, sorry, we're out of time. So if you have any more questions, it's going to be kicking around here a little bit longer too. So I guess any questions you can just ask it.
Yeah.
All right, another round.